Howls tore through the freezing midnight air, echoing a betrayal that would shatter the very foundation of the northern kingdoms. Seraphina stood trembling before the throne, her human heart breaking, as the Alpha King uttered the words that sealed her fate, unknowingly awakening an ancient, terrifying power. Torches flickered violently along the damp stone walls of Oakhaven Keep, casting long, monstrous shadows across the great hall. It was the winter of 1248, the night of the blood moon, a sacred evening when the goddess Selene was said to align the fates of the lycanthrope elite. Hundreds of noble wolves clad in heavy furs, boiled leather and chainmail gathered to witness the ascension and mating of their newly crowned Alpha King, Alonso Mendoza. Standing isolated at the center of the vast, unforgiving room was Seraphina Caldwell. To the surrounding lords and ladies, she was nothing more than an anomaly, a frail human orphan taken in by the late King Roderick Mendoza as an act of pity 2 decades prior. Seraphina wore a simple, undyed woolen gown that offered little protection against the biting draughts of the castle. She kept her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly together to hide her violent shivering. But she was not shaking from the cold. As Alonso Mendoza descended the obsidian steps of the dais, the air in the room grew heavy with his dominant aura. Alonso was a striking, terrifying figure, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred with piercing amber eyes that commanded absolute obedience. He was the most powerful wolf the northern reaches had seen in a century. And to Seraphina's sheer horror, he was her fated mate. The moment Alonso had stepped into the hall, the scent of crushed pine and winter frost had slammed into Seraphina's senses, binding her soul to his. She had seen his amber eyes widen in that brief, imperceptible moment of recognition. The mate bond had snapped into place a tether forged by the goddess herself. For a fleeting heartbeat, Seraphina felt a surge of foolish, impossible hope. Perhaps the years of scrubbing the scullery floors, enduring the mockery of the pack and being treated as less than dirt, were finally over. Alonso stopped mere inches from her. The proximity sent a profound, agonizing warmth radiating through her frail human body. She looked up her soft hazel eyes, meeting his predatory gaze, silently begging him to acknowledge their connection. Instead, Alonso's jaw clenched. The political reality of his kingdom crashed down upon him. The northern reaches were under constant threat from rogue factions and the savage southern clans. His council of elders, led by the ruthless Reginald Thatcher, had made it abundantly clear the new king required a warrior queen, a pure-blood Luna, who could breed strong heirs and lead armies. A human mate was a death sentence for his reign. It would invite rebellion before the winter thawed. Alonso closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, burying the frantic screams of his inner wolf deep within his psyche. When he opened them again, the warmth was entirely gone, replaced by a glacial void. "You stand before the throne of Oakhaven!" Alonso's voice boomed rich and resonant, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The hall fell utterly silent. "Seraphina Caldwell, a human sheltered by the grace of my late father." "Alonso, please." Seraphina whispered the words barely escaping her lips, meant only for his ears. He ignored her plea, turning slightly to address the murmuring crowd. The goddess weaves many strange paths, testing the resolve of those destined to lead. Tonight I am presented with such a test. He looked back down at her, his expression hardened into stone. "I, Alonso Mendoza, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, hereby reject you, Seraphina Caldwell, as my fated mate and Luna." A collective gasp swept through the hall, immediately followed by cruel, vindictive whispers. The words were a physical blow. Seraphina staggered back, clutching her chest as an excruciating pain tore through her sternum. The rejection of a mate bond was a violent severing of the soul. For a human, it was supposed to be fatal. She fell to her knees on the frozen stone floor, gasping for air as her vision blurred with tears. Stepping gracefully out of the shadows of the dais was Cassandra Pembroke, the daughter of the wealthiest duke in the Western Territories. Cassandra was a towering, statuesque werewolf with raven hair and a vicious, triumphant smirk. She wore a gown of deep crimson silk adorned with the pelts of wolves she had hunted herself. A wise and just decision, my king. Cassandra purred, stepping to Alonso's side and sliding her arm through his. She looked down at the weeping Seraphina with undisguised disgust. A king cannot be shackled to a frail, useless creature. Oakhaven needs a true Luna. Alonso did not look at Cassandra. He kept his eyes fixed on the arched doorway at the far end of the hall. Seraphina Caldwell. He commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the pommel of his broadsword. Your presence here is a disruption to the crown. You are hereby banished from the territories of the Mendoza Pack. You have until the hour of the wolf to gather your meager belongings and leave. If you are found within my borders at dawn, you will be hunted. The cruelty of the decree was staggering. To exile a human into the medieval wilderness in the dead of winter was an execution sentence veiled in the guise of mercy. You condemn me to death, Seraphina choked out, forcing herself to look into the eyes of the man who was meant to protect her above all others. I condemn you to your own fate, Alonso replied coldly. Escort her out. Two burly guards seized Seraphina by the arms, dragging her away from the warmth of the torches and the only home she had ever known. As the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, the last thing she heard was the sickening sound of the pack cheering for their new king and his chosen queen. The Direwood was a place of nightmares. Ancient twisted trees with blackened bark reached toward the starless sky like grasping talons. The snow was knee-deep, pulling at Seraphina's frozen limbs with every agonizing step. She had been walking for hours, driven purely by the primal instinct to survive, though the rejection bond was slowly shutting down her organs. Her breath plumed in the freezing air, her lungs burning with the effort. Her lips were cracked and bleeding her skin a sickly shade of blue. She clutched a threadbare cloak tightly around her shoulders, but the bitter wind cut right through the fabric, biting into her flesh. Miles away back in the warmth of Oakhaven, Keep the Mating Ball raged on, but Alonso Mendoza was not celebrating. He sat rigidly on his throne, a heavy goblet of mead resting untouched in his hand. The great hall was filled with music and laughter, yet a deafening silence roared in his ears. His inner wolf was thrashing against the confines of his mind, clawing at his chest in a desperate, maddening agony. "You look pale, my king," Lord Tobias Harrington noted, leaning in, close his eyes, darting to the empty space where Cassandra had stood moments before. She went to mingle with the generals. "It is nothing, Tobias." Alonso growled, his voice tight. But it was not nothing. He felt as though a piece of his soul had been violently amputated. The bond he had severed was bleeding out a phantom limb that ached with an intensity that threatened to drive him insane. He had chosen duty over destiny, and the goddess was demanding her toll. In the heart of the Direwood, Seraphina's strength finally gave out. She tripped over a concealed root, plunging face first into a snowdrift. She lay there, the cold seeping into her marrow, numbing the pain in her chest. It would be so easy to simply close her eyes and let the snow claim her. But as her eyelids fluttered shut, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the frozen earth beneath her. Seraphina forced her head up. Emerging from the tree line were 5 massive wolves. They were mangy, scarred, and feral rogues. Their eyes burned with a starving, malicious yellow light. Leading the pack was a hulking brute in human form, wearing stolen furs and a jagged iron sword strapped to his back. It was Gideon Fletcher, a notorious outcast who had been exiled for massacring his own kin. "Well, well!" Gideon rasped his breath, misting in the air as he drew his iron blade, the metal scraping ominously in the silent woods. "Look what the Mendoza king threw out with the scraps, a pretty little human." The wolves snarled, snapping their jaws as they circled her, their drool hitting the snow with soft hisses. "Please," Seraphina whispered, trying to crawl backward, but her limbs refused to obey. "I have nothing. You have flesh." Gideon smiled, a grotesque twisting of his scarred face. "And blood. We haven't eaten in days. But don't worry, little bird. I'll play with you before I let them feed." He lunged, grabbing Seraphina by the hair and hauling her violently to her feet. The pain was blinding. He threw her against the rough trunk of an ancient oak, knocking the last remnants of breath from her lungs. One of the rogue wolves snapped at her ankle, its sharp teeth tearing through her woolen dress and sinking into her flesh. Seraphina screamed. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated agony, a culmination of the betrayal, the freezing cold, and the impending, brutal death. But as the rogue's teeth pierced her skin, something extraordinary happened. The pain did not register as weakness. Instead, it struck a dormant chord deep within her cellular structure. For 20 years, a magical seal placed upon her by her dying mother had suppressed her true lineage, cloaking her aura to appear human, so she might survive the purges of the old world. The violent trauma of the mate rejection, combined with the imminent threat to her life, shattered that ancient seal into 1,000,000 pieces. A sudden terrifying heat exploded from Seraphina's core, melting the snow in a 10-foot radius around her. The rogue wolf that had bitten her yelped, leaping back as its muzzle was singed by an invisible fire. Gideon paused, shielding his eyes, as a blinding, ethereal light began to radiate from the frail woman's body. "What in the hells?" Gideon muttered, taking a step back, his instincts suddenly screaming at him to run. Inside, Seraphina bones began to lengthen and snap, but there was no pain, only an overwhelming, intoxicating sense of liberation. Muscles tore and reknitted with divine strength. Her vision sharpened, shifting from the limited spectrum of a human to the vibrant, hyper-detailed sight of an apex predator. The legends spoke of them only in hushed whispers around hearth fires. The white wolves. The first children of the moon, possessing raw magic and physical prowess that dwarfed even the strongest alpha kings. They were royalty incarnate, hunted to extinction centuries ago, or so the world believed. With a sound that was half scream and half roar, Seraphina's physical form dissolved into a blinding flash of silver light. When the light faded, Seraphina Caldwell was gone. In her place stood a beast of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. She was massive, standing nearly a head taller than the largest rogue wolf. Her fur was the color of fresh snowfall beneath a full moon, shimmering with an otherworldly luminescence. Her eyes, once a soft, human hazel, were now twin pools of glowing, radiant sapphire. The silence in the direwood was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Gideon dropped his sword, his face entirely drained of blood. "It's a myth," he stammered, falling to his knees as an oppressive godlike aura forced him down. "A damn bedtime story." The white wolf did not hesitate. With a speed that defied the laws of nature, she moved. She was a silver blur in the darkness. She clamped her jaws around the neck of the nearest rogue, snapping its spine with a sickening crunch before tossing the massive body aside like a rag doll. The remaining wolves panicked their feral instincts, shattering under the weight of her ancient dominance. They tried to flee, but she was everywhere at once. Her claws tore through flesh and bone with effortless precision. In mere seconds, the snow was painted crimson, and 4 rogue wolves lay dead. She turned her glowing sapphire eyes upon Gideon Fletcher. The bandit let out a pathetic whimper, crawling backward through the slush. "Mercy," he begged, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Please, goddess, mercy." The white wolf stepped forward, her massive paws completely silent. She looked down at the pathetic creature, sensing no honor, only rot and malice. She raised her head toward the black sky, and from her throat erupted a howl. It was not a normal wolf's cry. It was a song of ancient magic, of sorrow, of rebirth, and of vengeance. The sound rippled outward, carrying across the frozen plains, cutting through the heavy timber doors of Oakhaven Keep. Back in the great hall, the music abruptly stopped. Every werewolf in the castle froze their blood, running cold as the primal vibration rattled the mead in their cups. Alonso Mendoza dropped his goblet. It clattered against the stone, the dark ale spilling like blood across the floor. He gripped his chest, a sudden terrifying realization washing over his agonizing bond. The creature that had just claimed the night sky with that legendary howl was his rejected mate. Panic erupted within the stone walls of Oakhaven Keep, shattering the festive facade of the mating ball. The primordial vibration of the white wolf's howl still resonated in the marrow of every lycanthrope, present a sound that bypassed logic and struck directly at their primal instincts. Alonso Mendoza did not wait for his royal guard. He tore through the heavy oak doors of the great hall, his royal finery ripping as his body rapidly expanded, bones snapping and reforming in a violent, desperate shift. By the time his boots hit the snow-covered courtyard, he was no longer the Alpha King in human guise, but a massive, terrifyingly dark wolf, his black fur absorbing the ambient light. "Alonso, halt!" Lord Tobias Harrington shouted from the steps, struggling to keep pace, while Cassandra Pembroke stood frozen in the doorway, her crimson gown suddenly looking garish and foolish against the backdrop of ancient magic that hung in the air. Alonso ignored them all. He'd launched himself over the castle's iron gates, his massive paws digging into the frozen earth. His inner wolf was howling in pure agony, driven mad by the severed mate bond that now pulsed with an overwhelming, intoxicating scent. It was Seraphina's scent, vanilla and sweet cream, but it was no longer subtle or fragile. It was intertwined with the blinding, ozone-sharp aroma of a winter storm and ancient, untamed magic. He sprinted through the direwood, tearing through the suffocating blizzard with reckless abandon. The dark, twisted trees whipped at his face, but he felt nothing, only the magnetic, terrifying pull of the mate he had discarded. When Alonso finally breached the clearing, the metallic stench of fresh blood brought him to a skidding halt. He shifted back to his human form, his chest heaving, the freezing air biting at his bare skin. The sight before him defied all logic. 4 massive rogue wolves lay utterly decimated in the crimson-stained snow. They had not been merely killed, they had been obliterated by an apex predator of unfathomable power. Crawling pitifully through the slush was Gideon Fletcher. The notorious bandit was weeping, his body mangled, his iron sword lying uselessly in pieces near a scorched oak tree. Alonso lunged, hoisting the dying rogue by his stolen furs. "Where is she?" Alonso roared, his amber eyes blazing with an unholy terror. "Where is the human?" Gideon coughed blood, spattering across Alonso's chest. The rogue's eyes were wide, permanently dilated with a holy terror, not human. Gideon gasped, his voice rattling in his throat. A goddess, the white wolf. She is the myth. She is the end of us all. Alonso dropped the rogue, staggering backward, as if physically struck. The legends of the first children of the moon flooded his mind. They were the original rulers, blessed by Selene herself, possessing power that could shatter armies. And he, in his blind, arrogant pursuit of political stability, had banished one to freeze to death. He looked down at the snow. Mingled with the blood were paw prints. They were massive, larger than his own, and they glowed with a faint, residual silver luminescence. Deep within the Winterhorn Mountains, miles away from the carnage, Seraphina ran. She did not feel the biting cold. The freezing wind felt like a lover's caress against her shimmering silver fur. Her muscles rippled with boundless, untiring energy. For 20 years she had felt trapped inside a fragile, aching shell, constantly shivering, constantly afraid. Now she was the storm itself. She bounded up jagged cliffs that would have killed a mountain goat, moving with a supernatural grace. As dawn approached, casting a pale pink light over the jagged peaks, she discovered it, the Moonstone Citadel. It was a forgotten temple, carved directly into the heart of a glacier, lost to werewolf kind for a millennium. As Seraphina padded into the vast, crystalline courtyard, she willed the shift. It was seamless. No pain, no breaking bones. She stood naked in the frigid air, her human form restored, but fundamentally changed. She was no longer frail. She stood taller, her musculature defined and powerful, her skin radiating a soft lunar glow. Her hazel eyes were permanently ringed with brilliant sapphire. Resting upon an altar of solid ice was a crystalline basin filled with shimmering liquid moonlight. As she approached, a whispering voice echoed in her mind, the residual consciousness of the ancestors who had sealed away her lineage to protect her from the purges. You have awakened, daughter of the frost. The seal is broken. The North remembers its true sovereign. Seraphina stared at her reflection in the glowing water. The timid, rejected orphan was dead buried in the snows of the Direwood. In her place stood a queen forged in the crucible of absolute betrayal. Alonso Mendoza had cast her out to preserve his crown, utterly unaware that he had just unleashed the rightful ruler of the entire lycanthrope race. 6 agonizing months passed, and the northern reaches were bleeding. The Mendoza pack was on the verge of total collapse. Alonso's reign had become a nightmare. The violent severing of his mate bond was rotting him from the inside out. He suffered from violent tremors, blinding migraines, and terrifying bouts of paranoia. His once majestic black wolf form was shedding fur, growing gaunt and erratic. Without a strong alpha, the pack's defensive borders crumbled. The ruthless warlord Kalen of the Ashridge clan seized the opportunity. Gathering a massive horde of southern barbarians and rogue mercenaries, Kalen marched upon Oakhaven Keep. The siege had lasted 3 brutal days. Now the heavy iron gates of Oakhaven lay in ruins. Fire raged through the courtyards, thick black smoke choking the sky. Alonso stood at the entrance of the great hall, leaning heavily on his broadsword. His armor was dented and coated in gore. Surrounding him were the last remnants of his royal guard, including a heavily wounded Lord Tobias Harrington. "Where is Cassandra?" Alonso rasped, spitting blood onto the stone. "Fled my king!" Tobias panted, clutching a deep gash in his side. The moment the southern walls fell, she took her retinue and escaped through the crypts. Alonso let out a hollow, bitter laugh. He had traded his soul for a political alliance, and the prize had abandoned him at the first scent of death. He raised his sword as the smoke parted, revealing Warlord Kalen. Kaelin was a mountain of a lichen, covered in tribal tattoos and wielding a massive battle-axe. "Your reign is over, Mendoza," Kaelin bellowed his army of hundreds, fanning out, completely surrounding the exhausted northern defenders. "Kneel and I will make your death quick. Aligo." "A king of the north does not kneel to southern filth," Alonso growled, though his legs shook with the effort of standing. Kaelin sneered, raising his axe. "Then die on your feet." As the warlord charged, a sudden, unnatural silence descended upon the battlefield. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the world. The raging fires instantly froze the flames, turning into jagged sculptures of red ice. The temperature plummeted so drastically that Kaelin's mercenaries halted their breath, freezing in the air. Then the sky split open. A blinding column of pure silver light crashed down from the heavens, striking the earth directly between Alonso and the charging warlord. The impact sent out a shockwave of raw kinetic energy, throwing Kaelin and his vanguard backward into the mud. From the center of the brilliant crater emerged a figure that made the blood of every werewolf present run cold. It was Seraphina Caldwell. She wore battle armor forged from enchanted, glaciated steel, shimmering like diamonds in the smoke-filled air. A majestic cloak of woven silver thread cascaded down her back. Her eyes burned with terrifying sapphire fire, and the sheer magnitude of her aura forced hundreds of seasoned warriors to their knees, their inner wolves whimpering in absolute submission. But she was not alone. Flanking her were magnificent beasts of legend. 50 massive snow-white direwolves awakened from their centuries-long slumber beneath the Winterhorn Mountains paced protectively around her. They were beautiful, lethal, and completely loyal to the White Wolf. "What sorcery is this?" Kaelin screamed, scrambling to his feet, terror overriding his senses. He shifted into his massive brown wolf form, launching himself blindly at the glowing woman. Seraphina did not even draw a weapon. She simply raised a single armored hand. An invisible force slammed into Kaelin mid-leap. The massive warlord was thrown 50 feet into the air, crashing into the stone walls of the keep with a sickening crunch. He fell to the ground, his spine shattered instantly, returning to his human form incapacitated and utterly broken. Seraphina lowered her hand and swept her glowing gaze across the invading southern army. "Submit," her voice commanded. It was not a shout, but a melodic, echoing absolute that vibrated in the skulls of every living creature in the courtyard. "Or return to the earth." The Ashridge clan mercenaries dropped their weapons. To a man they fell to the frozen ground, exposing their necks in total unhesitating surrender to the sovereign of the snows. The battle was over in a matter of seconds. Seraphina turned slowly, her sapphire eyes finally resting upon Alonso Mendoza. The Alpha King dropped his broadsword. The sight of her radiant, invincible divine shattered whatever was left of his pride. The mate bond that had been agonizingly silent for 6 months suddenly flared to life within him, but it was one-sided, blocked by an impenetrable wall of her icy resolve. Alonso fell to his knees in the blood-soaked snow tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He bowed his head, his voice trembling with a profound, soul-crushing regret. "Seraphina, my mate, my Luna, you have returned." Seraphina stepped forward, her silver boots making no sound on the frozen earth. She looked down at the broken king, feeling none of the desperate, aching love she had once harbored for him. She felt only the cold, immense clarity of the winter sky. "You cast me into the dark, expecting me to perish, Alonso." Seraphina spoke her voice, devoid of malice, but utterly devoid of warmth. "You rejected your fated mate for a crown made of fragile iron." "I was a fool," Alonso wept, reaching out a trembling hand toward the hem of her cloak, too terrified to touch her. "I was blind." Please, Seraphina, the pack needs you. I need you. Reclaim your place at my side." Seraphina stepped back out of his reach. The giant white dire wolves behind her growled a deep, earth-shaking rumble that warned the fallen king to stay down. "I have not returned to save your reign, Mendoza," Seraphina declared, her voice ringing out across the silent, ruined courtyard for all to hear. "I have returned to claim what is mine. The era of the Alpha Kings has ended." She turned her back on him, walking gracefully toward the ruined gates, her majestic wolves falling into step behind her. "I am no one's Luna." Seraphina's voice drifted back over her shoulder, a final chilling decree that would echo through history. "I am the Queen of the North, and this kingdom now bows to me." The winter winds howled in triumph as the white wolf reclaimed her throne, leaving the broken Alpha King to live with the haunting echoes of his ultimate regret. Sometimes the ones cast into the shadows are merely waiting for the right moment to become the light. Did Seraphina's epic revenge give you chills? Smash that like button. Share this incredible tale of vengeance and power with your pack, and subscribe for more thrilling werewolf lore.